Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors on staff at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So as a piece of that, our goal each week is to bring you something that's hopeful and helpful. So subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Community Church podcast. If you find today's episode hopeful and helpful, then please follow or subscribe, and then rate and review so that more people can find the conversation. Now, we'll start off things for today by just letting you know that you'll only get me for our conversation today. Our podcast co-host Nate is feeling a little bit under the weather, so he couldn't make this episode, but he should be back for next week's conversation. But for today's conversation, I got to share with you all a chat that I had with Luke Fuerbringer. Luke's a Ridge attender who's gone from attending to being a part of a group to now leading a group starting this fall. So we talk about what it's like being in a Ridge group, what made him join one in the first place, and then he wraps up our conversation with some really insightful things about what to do if you have hesitations to join a group. It's really great, really insightful, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Here's my conversation with Luke. Well, hi, Luke. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to share.
Yeah, so curious, let me start off. Hey, how long have you been coming to the Ridge?
My wife and I have been coming since January 2019. We were looking for a different church to go to, trying some out in the area. And it was recommended to us to try the Ridge by my sister. She'd been going there for a couple months with her boyfriend at the time. They're now married, so I could say husband.
Oh, yeah.
And ironically, the sermon was about what happy couples know. And we had just caught the start of it. And it was really a great, I don't want to say attention grabber, but a great a great Ridge showing of what happens here. It's kind of like watching a TED Talk that really everybody could relate to. And very easy to follow. And it's very interesting. And we've been going ever since. We're very happy with our decision.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of those things where you, like, if there's something specific that you're like curious about and something grabs your attention, like it's really easy to dig in on those types of things and topics. So eventually you guys decided to, or was it you guys together, or did you individually just decided, hey, you know what, I'm going to join a group? What did that decision look like?
Together, we decided that it would be good if we joined a group. I had been in other youth groups before, and my wife had also been in youth groups before, but of course that was in our youth, growing up, high school, middle school type thing. I guess you could say being in college is kind of like being in a group. It's just you're studying instead of kind of building the community. So now that we're, at the time out of college for, a couple of years, looking to take the next step in our faith, is not only together, but separate and with other people that are in the same boat, it seemed that joining a group would be kind of the best way to go since we're all kind of in the same boat. So in spring 2019, my wife and I started doing the Rooted group with Pastor Joe. And we wanted to do Rooted because, excuse me, it seemed like the best next step as we're both Christians, we're both walking in our faith, but sometimes when you think you know something, you miss some of the details. And so although, we're both familiar with, Christ dying for us and why he did that, and, all the stories of the Bible and what they mean, we just thought it would be a good refresher to join the group and, go through it step by step and just make sure we're on the same page and we know what we should know and why we knew that. And I had kind of vague in my detail there, but Rooted is really a very interesting and detailed group. A lot of things to think about. I personally wanted to grow in my walk with God, and I'm not always sure how to do that. As you may hear people say, just pray about it. Well, then I pray, but then what do I do? Do I just pray some more? You probably heard the story of the guy on the roof, right, in the flood, and he's like, nope, God's going to save me, and 3 boats come by, and then a helicopter, and so when do you take some action? So joining Rooted seemed like the most logical action step that I could take, and I would say that it's been a great decision, and we still keep our booklets and reference them from time to time. But I would say the biggest thing that I learned when I did the rooted group is that I learned I take for granted God's value in me.
Hmm.
Maybe sometimes how you might take your spouse or like a good friend for granted is you kind of miss the big picture,
Yeah.
which is what taking for granted, means. I'm not
Right.
seeing what I should be seeing.
Do
Somebody
you
that
mean
lives in
like,
Paris maybe sees the Eiffel Tower every day, and to them it's just another building. Like, whatever, no big deal. But for the rest of us, we go there and we see it and we say, "Wow, how beautiful, how immaculate! What a blessing it is to be here and see something like this." And that's how I kind of saw my relationship with God. Um, when I was out of college, I made some bad decisions, and I was looking at the consequences and thinking like, how could I knowingly have done something like this? This is so bad. Nothing illegal. It's just for reference, but
it's
I was thinking,
okay. We
how
won't,
could
we
this
won't
be?
double check. You're good here.
um, and then doing the rooted group, the question came up, why does God want to pursue a relationship with you? And it's just really something I'd never thought about. So in
Mm.
thinking about it, that's when I realized I was taking this relationship with God for granted, that God does want to be, connected to me. And I just assumed it's kind of like an open door.
Mm.
So anyway, we're not talking about my relationship, but why would I want to join a group? Well, joining a group really opened this up to me. And so if
Mm.
you're someone who's not in a group, you think you got it together. I thought I had it together, and I'm not questioning how together you have it, but it's always good to check. It's always good to keep learning and keep growing. And that's what we were able to do when we joined this group.
I really appreciate where you're talking about like there's this something there that you're just kind of used to, and it's kind of like in your mind's eye and you're like, oh yeah, that's just kind of like a part of my life without actually like further investigating or like you mentioned taking it for granted, but I think it's almost like um I don't want to say you stop putting in effort, but a little bit of that, right? Where it's like you kind of just kind of go through what you usually do without trying to kind of move into like, oh, how can I explore this to a deeper level? Or how can I notice that more? Was there anything that like you mentioned in the Rudy group that you started to notice things more and by asking yourself that question, has that become like a regular pattern for you where you try to like, is there ways you try to remind yourself of that? Uh, just curious.
That's a good question. I think being in a group really helps because somebody else might bring up a good question or something
Yeah.
they heard, or encourage people to for example, in one of our life groups, we were talking about moving over to reading a book instead of talking about the sermon each week. Well, everyone's going to suggest something different, and why are they suggesting what they're
Hmm.
suggesting, and what impact might that have? Something I might have not picked up off the shelf, and now that I am reading it, I'm getting a different insight. But when I'm not in a group, how do I keep trying to? I don't want to say innovate, but get out of my routine so that I'm seeing something different and not so
I
much the
think
same.
innovate seems like a positive thing. And I mean, maybe not like reinventing the wheel per se, but like, oh, how do I innovate my version of this?
Mm, I think that the Bible app that the church uses for different devotionals,
Yeah.
not only the ones the church recommends, but you can search for different topics on your own and learn from that. I have somebody I do a devotional with on the Bible app, and so I'll pick some, and then they'll pick some, and so we're each picking different things, and that helps to kind of, I guess, innovate again,
Yeah.
innovate different concepts, and think about things differently. Most of the devotionals will have some questions at the end, or just topics they bring up in the devotional reading part, and then the Bible verse at the end. I think that's been the most consistent, innovative thing thus far.
Mm. I it's kind of cool that I see the pattern of like it's somebody else voicing their perspective that is helping you grow. And so that's really cool. I think that really, I mean, now because we're talking about groups, I mean that's a natural transition, right? Where it's like, oh,
Mm,
one of the values of being in a group is having these people that offer a perspective that, you might, I'll speak for myself being in a group. I'm like, oh, I never would have thought of it that way. And then you've said it this way. And so like, okay, even if I don't think about it that way now, it's changed my perspective a little bit and I've grown because of it. Has that been like beyond rooted into other groups you've been in? Has that been your experience?
You're asking me if I've taken the influence of others for my personal growth?
Yeah, like has people sharing their perspective changed your own while in group?
Yes. Yeah. That I would say that other people's perspective has certainly helped. It's not, they don't always say something and I immediately believe 100% of it. And that's
Totally.
directly changed my perspective. But a lot of times it might help, question it. Like, why does this bother them? Why are they saying this?
Mm,
So and so might say they struggle with XYZ. And I've never thought about it. Like, I mean, you could pick your poison. There's plenty of things
sure.
people
Yeah.
question. But then to kind of, talk about it with my spouse, we both most of the time see the same people during conversations in group or something else. And we'll talk about it with each other and another person to bounce different perspectives off of. Mm.
So curious, maybe like this like granular, someone who's never been part of a group before. What do you think in your experience somebody could expect as they join a group, they walk in the door for the first time and they're just with people they don't really know. What's that experience like? Is there a way to like move past that? What was your experience like?
Good question. I think expectations and stereotypes can kind of run in the same lane.
Mm,
I think there's a bit of a stereotype that joining a group means it's very rigid, right? Like a classroom, and it's just about work or it's just about learning. And
mm,
that's not the case when you
yeah.
join a group. I like to think of a group maybe as a team.
Mm,
Everybody's on the team. We have the same goal. We have the same commitment, right? We show up to play, we show up to practice, but we're not a professional team. If we lose, it's not a big deal because we're just there to play. And so I think what you could expect when you maybe join a group for the first time is kind of like trying out for a team. But in this case, everybody's on if you want to be there. There's no cuts. So you show up, right? It's a little awkward. Like I don't really know what I'm doing and I don't know what to say. And
mm,
this might be a little weird. And, maybe somebody talks about their childhood and you don't like talking about your childhood. So that's a little uncomfortable. Like, oh, I feel like I'm obligated to share, but I don't want to share. And the good news is you don't have to. You don't have to commit to that team. You could try
yeah.
a different team. You could try going to a different group, and it's nothing personal. It's not a business. It's not a business decision. It's a personal decision. So you
Mm,
go, and maybe you don't like it. It's a little weird. You just try a different one. But I think people also get hung up on that they're the only ones experiencing what's going on.
mm,
If you start a new group, or you join a group, and there's other new couples, everybody's more or less in the same boat. I don't know them and they don't know me. So they also feel a little awkward or uncomfortable. And I just think it's great that excuse me, the groups that I've been in and the people that have been running the group are all very aware of this.
mm.
And they're able to help kind of pull people in a little bit better. And you have the time to get to know others and in a way that's really not as awkward or uncomfortable. But if you expect to join a group and in no way will it be awkward at all, ever, well, that's unrealistic. That's
Yeah.
like saying, I'm going to get on a flight across the country and there will never be any turbulence or shaking or bumps
Mm,
ever. It's certainly possible, but it's very unlikely.
yeah. I think to your point, I really appreciate that you call out the fact that you're probably going to experience some awkwardness, um, and yet even though you experience some awkwardness, you push through, and because of that, you're able to experience like the benefits of that and the connection. Um, and I assume that you enjoyed it because you stayed in those groups and or tried out new ones. So,
Yes, definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing for me that surprised me the most with groups is how much I would need them. And not just in the group perspective, not in the sense that it's like a therapy, right? I go and I share all my problems. You certainly can go and share your problems because as a community, we're supposed to be able to rely on each other, but I'm not overbearing them with my problems at the time. What I mean is that the people I seem to spend the most time with, besides my spouse, time with each other, are the people I meet in group. I
Mm,
have, of course, I'm sure, you do too, friends from college or friends from growing up. But the people I see the most are the people I've met in group.
mm,
Um, and not only just, you call them up to watch the football game or have dinner. If I need help with something, I've asked my friends from high school, who I'm still friends with, and
mm,
most of the time they don't call me back or they're busy. And if I call my friends who are in group, even if they have something going on, they make time or
mm,
they get back to me quickly, like I'm busy. But I know so and so from group was going to come over. I could ask him to swing by and help you first.
mm.
And I don't think people realize that. And I'm certainly not encouraging you to join a group just to get free labor. But the commitment of other people is different.
That is not a Ridge promise. Yeah.
Not a rich promise. No, little asterisk at the bottom.
Yeah.
Mm, hmm.
What do you think it is about group that, or like being a part of a group that like makes you feel like you want to be there to help people and kind of have the opposite happen as well?
Hmm. Well, it's a lot easier when we kind of all have the same goal. Like in a group, I want to grow personally and I want to make friends. And I'm not saying you can't have that outside of the church, of course. Like I'll meet up with my high school friends and I'll meet up with my college friends. But our level of intimacy doesn't go as deep as it does with a church group, I've noticed. And it
Mm.
might be because it's just not as common to, you go to Buffalo Wild Wings, you sit down with your friends and the sports game's on, and you say, like, man, what have you guys really been struggling with lately?
Yeah.
or
They're like my
um,
fantasy football team. Yeah.
yeah, and you're like, deeper, come on.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not as common, right? And we just to clarify as well, we don't go to group and have a section where we all go around and talk about our deepest struggles for the month.
Yeah.
But our conversations go about our growth in Christ, and our growth in Christ relates to, part of ourselves. Like, where am I not
Mhm.
acting Christ-like? Am I struggling with being too prideful or, secretive, arrogant? Um, in order to grow with Christ, I need to address these things. And so these things get brought up in group. And it's not saying it comes up and everybody has to say what their problems are. That's
Right.
not what we're encouraging people to do. But what we're encouraging people to do is grow. And in order to grow, you got to have some level of connection. And
Yeah.
so I find that the connections are deeper in the groups that I'm in than I am with the people I have grown up with. And not to say that that's bad. I certainly could reach out to them and just talk about where they're at and how things are going, and it's just not as common.
No, I think there's a point to the fact that you're in a setting where it's like, hey, you have permission to have a real conversation,
Mm,
and you're going around, you're like, hey, you can share in a real way on these things. And when you have that and you like know that somebody else has given you permission to share deeply as well, like then it becomes like, hey, you know what? Now if I am watching the football game, like with somebody from group, hey, you know what? I know that like I can talk to them about that stuff because they've given me permission to, and I have that openness with them. Versus, it might be more challenging to bring up with someone that like you know doesn't like you don't even know if they care.
that's yes, a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't want to paint the picture that every group member shares perfectly and listens perfectly to what you're saying and like totally understands where you're at, because we just can't promise that. Some
Yeah.
people talk too little, some people talk too much, some people aren't very empathetic. I personally struggle with being more empathetic, but at least I'm in an environment where I'm aware that
Mm.
I'm not really being judged for my faults because I'm trying to fix my faults. And I just can't promise that outside because people aren't really focusing on those things.
No, but I mean, I think I like what you said earlier when you said you're like it's like a team where it's like you know what people are coming and being their real selves, and so if you're not a super big sharer or extrovert sharer, like you might come to a group and be like, you know, I'm gonna listen and like be really thoughtful on how I'm like maybe I'll ask a question or something like that, and that can be more of your experience than this boisterous. Like there's not that expectation.
Mhm.
Um, Especially because I think like you're saying, it's like, hey, come be yourself. You know,
Oh, yes.
don't put
Yes.
on this front. Um, and and people are people. Like you said, it's not like a bunch of perfect people in a perfect group. It's like real people with lots of different personalities and things that are chatting, you know?
I like how you put that. That's a very, simplified way to put it is you're invited to be yourself
Mm.
here.
Yeah. Um, okay. So you've appreciated groups enough to the point where like, hey, now you've decided, hey, I want to lead a group. And I mean, you told me that like part of that is just like, oh, it felt like it was the right thing. Um, but what does it look like to like, oh, this does look like the right thing? And then maybe now that you're going to be leading a group, what do you kind of hope for the people that you're leading?
Hmm. Well, I hope that we'll give it a try. Not only the concept of joining a group, but joining a group and then being active, and then maybe even taking the step and learning how to run a group and be a leader. And I certainly don't have all the answers, and so one of my fears was being able to answer questions because a lot of times I'm the one asking all the questions and I don't get really good answers.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have the answers.
Mm.
You just have to be. I'm pardon me, but I would say my role isn't to be the all knowing. My role is to be the facilitator for the environment so that we can all talk about it. We can
Mm.
kind of think more about it, and maybe even if something really came up and everyone was really very interested in answering a question that I would kind of shift gears, call an audible, like, hey, you know what, let's just focus on this instead. Why don't we all you make a plan. You're kind of steering the boat, and so I'm trying to steer the boat in the sense that we get the most growth because the purpose of the group is not only knowledge growth but personal growth in my relationships with the other people in the group, and um, you kind of build in that community. And
Mm.
so um, yeah, my hope for the group really is just the growth all around.
Yeah. You you mentioned that you're like forming a community. This may be a super broad question, so if you give broad answers, I guess that's fair. But what what do you feel like it means to be like to create that community?
Well, it is a it's certainly more responsibility than just being in the community because somebody's got to figure out what you're going to talk about, where you're going to meet,
Mm.
make sure everyone's free at the same time. But those are, I would say, more of the business side of things. I got to set up the meeting and send out the invitations, set up some content, and it's really not overly difficult. And the reason I say that with confidence is there are so many people at the Ridge who have already set up materials and or know other people that have set up the materials, and the materials could be the content, the questions, books to read, topics of conversation, questions to ask the group. That burden is really lifted because you can just ask for it. You can ask for help, and we should be asking the church for help because I don't know all the answers, and I'm
Yeah.
not saying the church knows all the answers, but they certainly know more than I do, and I would be foolish not to get their input before I make a decision.
Mm. All right. So last question for me. Somebody's listening right now and they're thinking, I don't know if I really want to join a group. I keep hearing the Rich talk about it and they talk about that it's important and stuff, but I don't know if I fully buy into it. Um, Speaking as someone that's been a part of them, now leading one, what would you say to them?
Well, what is your fear of joining a group? Like, I don't want to because I think they're boring, or I don't want to because I'm uncomfortable around new people. Well, yeah, I could list some other, reasons, right? Sometimes you're just not interested. But why are you not interested? Is it because, like I said, you think it's boring or it's too much work? It's inconvenient for you. I want you to think about what you really want, right? Because I want to, like enjoy my life and help others. I want to have a great relationship, with the people around me, especially my spouse. And when I don't engage with other people who are trying to do the same thing at a deeper level, I'm really missing out on a chance to learn and grow and have the support of the other people who are in the same boat and might know something I don't. So I certainly don't like being uncomfortable or going into uncomfortable situations. But how much more uncomfortable would you find yourself if you didn't have anyone around you because you didn't go to a group once and try it out, right? So you make the decision not to join a group, and now you do need help. And it's not just moving a couch, I don't really know how to help my spouse. I don't really know how to connect with my girlfriend or boyfriend about coming to church with me. And, other people have already been in those situations, or they knew someone who was. And I'm not saying you can't find the answer outside of a group, but to have the people around you who are supportive, because they share the same goals and they're even willing to help you and go out of their way for it, that's a huge gain. Huge gain. Like it's people say it, right? So it seems kind of vague, and it's buy now, it's on sale. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then you hear it all the time, and now it just doesn't ring as much. But if you weigh, the cost and effect, I'm uncomfortable, or I think it's boring, or it's too much of a time commitment. But your gains on the other side are like lifelong, deep friendships, a mist of just personally growing so much. Which one's really more important to you?
Mm.
And are you really, because if you're uncomfortable, bring somebody with you. Now you have someone to kind of ease the burden with. If you think it's boring, we'll find a group that does something more interesting. Even if you just join a group that plays sports.
Mm.
I mean, you could start with that and just get to know some people, and who knows where things will go from there. If you have too much of a time commitment, and you're going on in your life, well, why don't you just go every other week? You don't have to commit to going regularly. Just try it out. Maybe you do go, but you leave early or you come late, depending on your circumstances. And you can even bring a friend to do those things with you. Again, make it less awkward, leaving early or late. There's a lot of ways that you can make this easier for yourself. But a lot of times we're just very quick to say no. But when I say no, I don't always think about the consequences for the actions I'm deciding on. So I'd encourage people to like really think about it, but think about the why. Why don't I want to go? Why don't I want to join? As opposed to the how would I get there or what are we going to talk about? Think about the why, like the very root of the issue. That's what I would suggest.
Dude, that is that is a well thought out, and I just love that thought process. And I think that's going to be super helpful for people. And a little bit of mic drop moment. I really appreciate that because that was so good. But thanks, Luke. Thanks for coming on and chatting about your experience and your journey. And I hope your Ridge Group experience this year as leading is going to be amazing. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I certainly hope somebody could learn something from this.
Well, that was my conversation with Luke, and my hope is that really your takeaway is to join a group if you're not a part of one. It's been a game changer for Luke. I know that it's been a game changer for me in my life and the connections that I've made with people. And I really think that it'll be for you as well. Now, we have a link to our Ridge Group Finder in the show notes or in the description if you're on YouTube, and you can get signed up there. Now, if you're already a part of a group, here's your action step. Send this podcast to someone that you think is on the fence of joining a group or not, or invite them to be a part of your group. This can be helpful for them to be encouraged to take that step and have their life be impacted too. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast, and make sure to subscribe and follow so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.